Look at this scoreline. 149 to nothing. It is not a typo. It is not a misprint from a badly kept record book in some forgotten corner of football history. It is the official, verified, Guinness-recognized highest score ever recorded in a football match. But that is not the strange part. The strange part is that the winning team barely touched the ball, not for one goal, not for 10, for all 149, because every single one of those goals was scored by the losing team into their own net on purpose. This is the story of the night 11 professional footballers decided that the only way to be heard was to destroy their own game and accidentally set a world record that has never been broken. Before that night, the highest score in football history belonged to a Scottish Cup tie from 1885. Arbroath had beaten a team called Bonacor 36 goals to nil. It was the kind of Victorian oddity that felt untouchable, a relic from an era before organised defending, before professional leagues, before football was really football. That record stood for 117 years. Then on the 31st of October 2002, on an island in the Indian Ocean, it was not just broken, it was obliterated 4 times over, and it happened in a league match that on paper meant absolutely nothing. Here is what almost everyone gets wrong about this story. They assume the team that lost 149 to nil must have been a village side hockey, a collection of amateurs who wandered onto a professional pitch by mistake. They were the reigning national champions. Stade Olympique de SOE had won the Malagasy League the year before, and they had won it by beating the exact same club they would later lose to by 149 goals. AS Adema 1-0 in the final as champions. SOE went into the African Champions League, and they were good. They knocked out Petro Atlético of Angola, one of the continent's established powers. They reached the second round, and they came within a single goal of the group stage, losing on aggregate to a club from Mozambique. 3 goals to 2, 1 goal short. Hold on to that detail. This was a team that understood better than almost anyone exactly how much a single goal was worth. The 2002 Malagasy Championship came down to a final playoff round. 4 clubs, a round-robin format. Everybody plays everybody twice. 12 matches crammed into 11 days. 11 days for professional footballers on an island where the resources of the game were thin and the margins were thinner. This was brutal. Bodies breaking down, no time to recover, and every single result mattering more than the last. So we were the defending champions. They were in the race. And then in the second to last match of the entire tournament, everything collapsed. SOE were playing a side called Domina Soavina Ratsimandresy. The score was 2-2. SOE needed more. And then came a refereeing decision that SOE believed cost them everything. The match finished level. That single dropped point was enough to knock the champions out of the title race. And now, refereeing controversies happen every weekend in every league on earth, and teams lose titles to bad calls, and then they get on the bus and go home. But SOE's grievance was not about one decision. Their belief, their coach's belief, and was that this was simply the latest in a pattern. That calls had been going against them throughout the playoff, and that complaining through the proper channels had achieved precisely nothing. They felt they had already tried being reasonable. And there is something else worth understanding here. This was not a league with television money and player agents and lawyers on retainer. For a club like SOE, the championship was not just a trophy. It was the route into continental competition. And continental competition was where the money and the visibility were. Then they had already been there once. They had already tasted it. Losing the title did not just cost them a medal. It cost them the only door out. There was one match left, SOE against AS Adema, and it was completely mathematically meaningless. Adema had already secured the championship. SOE had already secured second place. Nothing that happened in those 90 minutes could change a single position in the table. In football terms, it was a dead rubber. The sort of fixture players go through the motions in and supporters barely bother attending. For SOE's coach, Ratsimandresy Ratsarazaka, that was exactly the point. A meaningless game meant a free platform. 90 minutes in which nothing could be lost because there was nothing left to lose. The 31st of October 2002, the referee blows for kickoff. SOE take the ball and they turn around, a pass backwards. then another, and then an SOE player calmly strikes the ball into his own net. 1-0 to Adema. The Adema players look at each other. Confusion, maybe it was a mistake, a mix-up. These things happen. The bot goes back to the center circle, kick off again, SOE turn around again, 2-0. And now every single person in that stadium understands exactly what they are watching. What follows is one of the most surreal 90 minutes in the history of organized sport. Kick-off, own goal, kick-off, own goal. Over and over. On a loop, roughly once every 36 seconds, the Adema players simply stopped. Now, there was no point pressing, no point tackling, no point attacking. Reports describe them standing around bemused, watching their opponents methodically dismantle their own scoreline. And between the first goal and the 149th, Adema barely had to touch the ball going forward. They won the highest scoring match in football history without ever really playing football. In the stands, supporters began walking out. Some of them went to the ticket booths and asked for their money back, and nobody stopped it. The match ran the full 90 minutes. Think about what that actually required. Not a moment of madness, not one player losing his temper and lashing out. 90 minutes of sustained, deliberate, repeated self-destruction. 149 separate decisions to turn around and put the ball in your own net, while a stadium watched and a referee let it continue. Whatever else it was not impulsive. It was the most patient act of defiance football has ever seen. When the final whistle went, the scoreboard read a number no scoreboard had ever been built to display: 149 to nothing. And spare a thought for one man in particular. SOE's goalkeeper that night was Mamisoa Razafindrakoto, a professional, a full international. And in 90 minutes, he picked the ball out of his own net 149 times. Not one of them from an opponent's shot. It is, without question, the strangest line in any footballer's career record. And here's the part of the story nobody talks about. The coach made the decision. The federation punished the coach, but it was not the coach who had to walk out onto that pitch in front of a paying crowd and kick a football into his own net 149 times. Every one of those goals was struck by a professional footballer. Men who had trained their whole lives to do the exact opposite. Men who had 12 months earlier been champions of their country and had beaten one of the biggest clubs in Angola. We do not know what any of them thought about it, whether they agreed, whether they argued in the dressing room beforehand, whether they went home that night proud of taking a stand or sick about what they had just done to their own careers. What we do know is that the record book does not record any of that. It records a number. The Malagasy Football Federation did not find it funny. Coach Ratsimandresy Ratsarazaka was suspended for 3 years. SOE's results from that 2002 season were forfeited. The protest erased from the competition, even as the scoreline was written into the record books forever. 4 years later, the club dissolved entirely. The Champions of Madagascar, the team that had knocked out Angolan giants and come within one goal of Africa's group stage, simply ceased to exist. The goalkeeper, though, kept going. Mamisoa Razafindrakoto carried on playing professionally and carried on representing Madagascar internationally for almost another decade. The man who conceded 149 goals in a single night did not let it end him. Now, ever since, people have argued about what that night actually was. Some see it as a legitimate act of protest. A team with no power, in a system with no accountability, using the only leverage it had left. They had complained, nobody listened, so they built something so absurd that the whole world would have to look at it, and in a narrow sense, it worked. More than 20 years later, we are still talking about a domestic league match in Madagascar. The story traveled further than any formal complaint ever could have. Others see it very differently. A coach dragging 11 players into a farce, humiliating his own team, insulting the supporters who had paid to be there, turning a professional sport into a joke. And there is no documented evidence that the protest produced any actual reform. The refereeing did not change because of it, and the club did not survive it. Both of those things can be true at once. A record that stood for 117 years fell in a single evening, and the record that replaced it is almost certainly permanent. No team will ever beat another by 149 goals through football. The only way to reach that number is the way SOE reached it, by refusing to play, which leaves us with the strangest fact in the entire story. The highest score in the history of football was not achieved by the greatest attacking side who ever lived. It was not a display of skill or power or dominance. It was created by 11 men who stopped trying, and in doing so, wrote themselves into the record books forever.